All right, well, good morning. We got a lot of stuff that we want to jump into this morning. Based on some conversations we had at our Circle Sunday a couple weeks back, I want to wrap up with hopefully one last session of our Antichrist series. If I can get it all bundled up into one, then we got something fun we're going to do in session 2. But I didn't want to take the time to recreate some of the slides that I have for some of this information because I'm pulling a lot of it from where we originally taught it in our series, Legends of the Fall, Origin of Our Enemy. And so those sessions exist in a more comprehensive level than what I'll probably be able to get to this morning, because what I'm gonna attempt to do is interweave some of the stuff we taught then with some of the stuff we've learned about this persona, this individual that we call the Antichrist. And so try to connect some threads, if it were, because we did not do that when we did Legends of the Fall. But without doing any review, I just want to jump back to this one slide and kind of put it up there because there are places you can dig into more information here. There's many perspectives and expectations about where the Antichrist is going to come from, who that individual is going to be. There is a Catholic concept. If you study the history of the Roman Catholic Church, and I take flack sometimes from obviously people outside of our little community here, but I take flack because, make no mistake about it, the actual doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church, not all Catholics, okay, there are good Bible-believing Christian people in the Catholic Church, but the actual doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church are oftentimes occultic, and people haven't done the research to see what that's all about. But because the church married the world just after Constantine in church history, a lot of pagan ideas that came from pagan Rome, which came from pagan Pergamus, which came from pagan Babylon, got indoctrinated into Catholic dogma because the emperor of the Roman Empire at the time declared everybody a Christian. And so all of a sudden, even if you never served Christ, even if you were not interested in Christ, you were a pagan priest, you became a Christian pastor. It was just like that. And so a lot, in order to bring unity to the empire and all of that kind of stuff, sun god worshipers were now Christians, and Sunday was chosen as the primary day of worship to make both camps happy. And throughout the Middle Ages then, a lot of these old pagan practices, which are where we get the Easter bunny and the Easter egg, and where we get Christmas trees and Yule logs, and even where we get purple and red vestments for the priests, and hot cross buns, and a whole bunch of traditional Catholic doctrines. They don't come anywhere from Christianity. They come from the ancient Babylonian religion. And because of that, and because the Roman Catholic Church has amassed so much wealth, and because for so many centuries they were the dominant power in the western part of the world, there is a perspective that people have often thought. If you go back and you read a lot of historical church information, people focused on the Pope as the Antichrist. So if we can put that slide back up for everybody there, Michelle. The next perspective, and this is really one worth studying, is an Islamic perspective about the Antichrist. And the reason that we've only really begun to hear a lot about this perspective in recent years, probably in a lot of ways since 2001, et cetera, when the 9/11 attacks happened and stuff, that people really began to be more universally aware of jihad and what jihad means. But if you want to go deeper into this one, I suggest a book by an author by the name of Joel Richardson. He wrote a book called The Islamic Antichrist. And what he really spells out is what Islamic eschatology, or the study of end times to a Muslim, looks like. Okay? And they have a character in their story called the Mahdi, who is a great uniter of peoples. In fact, when Jesus returns, he is actually a prophet for the Mahdi. And it is worth studying that perspective. I don't know that it is the sole perspective that we would need to take a look at, but it is very interesting to understand what the Quran teaches, what the Hadith teaches, et cetera, so that you're more informed than just the typical Western mindset that it's going to rise. Like books like The Woman Rides the Beast and Dave Hunt, they're really focused on Rome as the sword of the Antichrist. And there are other perspectives. You have to remember that as Christians, we're blessed to have some Eastern influence or Eastern European influence in our community here. Not the entire world was taken over by the Roman Catholic Church. We talk about Rome in two parts, and we've done that here. The statue of David in Daniel chapter 2, that's the legs of the statue, and it breaks into two parts. And even though the Western Roman Empire fell, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantium Empire, it lasted for 1,000 more years. And out of that, you get the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, that don't see the Roman Catholic Church as such a big deal because they were the ones in power in Eastern Europe and in Russia and in those. So there's a whole part of the world that's not as Roman Catholic centric, even as we are in America and in the West. Okay? You watch TV, the only legitimate church in the world in American TV is the Roman Catholic Church, and even if you're a Baptist, you're a holy roller and you're crazy and you're holding snakes. I mean, that's the way TV represents Protestant Christians. So just food for thought. So do some more research on the Islamic Antichrist. That's an excellent book to read. It will inform you. There's a lot of good information out there about that today. I did not feel that I needed to take us deeper down that path. Another one that is really worthy of studying that causes people to speculate. And this is all speculation that I'm talking about here, so that you're aware of the different views, because everybody wants to try to shoehorn end-time prophecy into the headlines, right? We want to make the headlines fit the prophecy. So what are they talking about? Another thing people start to talk about is they talk about the technological ramifications of the Antichrist. What does that mean? Even an atheist like Stephen Hawking was terrified of the rise of artificial intelligence and what that means. The fact that machines are coming to a point. We are literally, this is not as much science fiction as it used to be. We're coming to the point where we are on the cusp of developing intelligent machines. If we could develop a quantum processor, a quantum computer, which is what scientists are working on, then the amount of operations that computer can do can begin to simulate actual intelligence. We could write algorithms that allow machines to think and to learn. That's where we're at. Now, do we have it yet? No. Do we have it in 10 years? Do we have it in 20 years? Those are real possibilities. And so some people speculate that maybe it's something along those lines. Then you have people that speculate when it comes to what we call the conspiratorial aspect of the one world government and all this kind of stuff that we will allude to as we continue our survey of Revelation. But, you get out there and you get outside of me just trying to stick just to what the Bible teaches, you're going to start to hear all these different theories. And so I'm just trying to set it in order for you a little bit. What is the conspiracies? There are real life conspiracy theories. People don't realize this, but the Illuminati was a real thing. It was founded by a guy by the name of Alexander Weishaupt or Adam Weishaupt, and there were global cabals that tried to consolidate power and all of these kind of things. And some people speculate that is a move by Satan's organization to create a one world government. You're going to hear that kind of stuff. There may be some validity to it. There may not be some validity to it. Don't go overboard in trying to shoehorn Revelation into those types and models. Stick to what the Scripture says. Realize that we're blessed if we understand the book, but we don't have to understand. We don't have to follow along what every preacher who can take his cell phone and take an upward shot of his nostrils on YouTube wants to talk about for 50 minutes. We want to be able to have some discernment about this kind of stuff. One of the last ones that is worth really considering and talking about is this thing that for lack of a bigger term, we would call the eternal hatred. And that is what began with Jacob and Esau in the womb and the fact that the Israelites and the Edomite people, who are now primarily Arabic people, it's a little more complicated than that, but then you also have the previous division from Isaac and Ishmael, okay, these groups that have had a genetic hatred of each other, and the Bible speaks to, and we'll probably cover this in a separate event at a different time, that there are unresolved things that prophetically will have to happen between these two parties. And so that does make us lend ourselves to watching all of the politics that take place, like we've been seeing in recent weeks when we start to see peace accords in the Middle East, or we start to see all of that kind of stuff going on. Do I think that the peace accords that are taking place in the Middle East right now are a good thing? Sure, they're a good thing. They're still demanding a two-state solution. And as long as they're still demanding a two-state solution, the Palestinians are never going to accept it. And so it is not the peace accords that the Bible talks about the Antichrist coming in and confirming. We're not sitting on the cusp. Okay, if it is, great. It means Jesus is coming back sooner, but we don't have to try to shoehorn today's headlines into prophecy. We just don't have to do that. Okay? What I want to spend some time talking to you about, though, is a thread that exists in the biblical text that a lot of people don't know or understand. And I think, regardless of which one of those perspectives we see taking place, excuse me, we see taking place, we're seeing some reemergences. And the bottom line is, yes, I've got 4 or 5, maybe there's some other perspectives out there, but it really could be an amalgamation of all of those things. It doesn't have to be one of those paths. If you look at our current pope, what is he doing? He is trying to bring us to a place that Islam and Christianity are serving the same God. Right? We shouldn't be critical of Muslims. There's a term that you want to know and you want to understand, and it's a deceptive term that's out there. It is a term that is called ecumenicism. And ecumenicism started out as a belief that all the Christian denominations should get together, despite what their doctrinal differences might be, and just acknowledge that we worship Jesus. So if you're a Presbyterian, or you're a Methodist, or you're a charismatic, or whatever the case, we should all just worship Jesus because we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. And in that sense, ecumenicism can have some merit. The problem is when that same label is applied to all religions instead of all denominations of the Christian religion, we start to have some issues. And that's been very popular and has started to become very popular with our current pope. The concept that Hinduism, or the concept that Islam, the concept that all of these religions, there's multiple paths to God, that's been the relabeling of an ecumenical movement. It's a false ecumenical movement, but it leads to, ultimately, the suppression of Christianity, because Christianity demands 2 things. And these come straight from Jesus. It demands exclusivity. You can have no other gods before me. And it demands evangelism. We have to tell other people about Jesus. And as long as that's the truth, and we have to say there's one God, and He claims to be the way, the truth, and the life, and anybody else doesn't get a shot at being the way, the truth, and the life, and we stick to a biblical worldview of that, then Christianity has to be suppressed so the other religions of the world can be ecumenicized. They can come together, right? Because true biblical believing Christians will never compromise on those 2 E's of Christianity. Does that make sense to everybody? So these different perspectives can come together, but where does the enemy really start to raise his head? Well, we know that the enemy, he seeks, beyond a shadow of a doubt, he seeks to use the plans and the purposes of man. He deceives and he works behind the scenes. But there is a biblical thread, there is a biblical premise, and it is a spooky one. And most Christians, even Christians who hold to a biblical worldview, they don't like to deal with this issue. But before we get to that, I just want to look at some other verses that we didn't quite get to in our assessment of this character called the Antichrist. Remember in recent sessions, one of the things that we highlighted, one of the things that we tried to bring out is he's got all these different titles, right? I could go back to the slide where we see all those different titles of the Antichrist, 30-some titles in the Old Testament. And one of the main titles that started to come up as we went through Daniel 7 and as we went through Daniel 8 and as we went through Daniel 11 was this title of the little horn. Another very important title of the Antichrist is the title that I have kind of pulled out on this screen, which is the title of the Assyrian. It seems like there is a yet future person in the biblical text that keeps getting referred to as the Assyrian, as someone who quite potentially has an Assyrian heritage. Let's look at a couple of verses and you'll start to see what I mean. Micah 5 through 6 says, "And this one shall be peace. When the Assyrian comes into our land and when he treads in our places, then we will raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 princely men. They shall waste with the sword the land of Assyria and the land of Nimrod at its entrances. Thus he shall deliver us from the Assyrian when he comes into our land and when he treads on our borders." Now, again, here you see a linkage in the biblical text because remember, that first great world dictator, we said, is like an echo of the coming one world dictator, Nimrod. He founded 2 cities. He founded Babel in Genesis 11, but we know that he also founded Nineveh, the capital of the city of the empire of Assyria. Nineveh is the city that Jonah was sent to minister to, right? And here we see that Assyria is called the land of Nimrod. So it's a callback to that first one world dictator. Now, of course, portions of the scripture are talking about when the northern kingdom is going to be restored, but this is where you have to kind of begin to parse some nuance, where it's important, okay? So we ask the question, is the pseudo-Christ or the Antichrist of Assyrian descent? Then we can go to places like Isaiah 10, verses 20 through 21 and following. It says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as have escaped of the house of Jacob will never again depend on him who defeated them, but will depend on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. In truth, the remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God." Now, we know that we live in a day and an age when Israel has been restored to the land, right? They have their own country. They are their own country again. But are they yet at the place where they are dependent on the Lord? No, they're a secular state. Has Israel yet acknowledged Jesus Christ as their Messiah? No. So there is, while this verse can be talking about the return from captivity and aspects of that, there are portions of it that are yet unfulfilled. And that's one of the tricky things when it comes to reading parts of these scriptures, when people want to say it had a past tense fulfillment for us or that it's already been fulfilled. Show me where Israel has ever accepted Jesus Christ as their Messiah. It's never happened yet. And so even though we see things leaning towards or building towards the ultimate prophetic fulfillment of something, because we haven't seen that phrase, but will depend on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth, the remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God, we haven't actually seen a fulfillment of that yet. So that tells us that something that we're looking at here is yet to be fulfilled. And remember, prophecy is a pattern. We can see a partial fulfillment. We can see that partial fulfillment be an echo to the future and ultimate fulfillment. That's how prophecy works. And too many prophecy buffs, they get really hung up on it's been fulfilled. No, there's a yet future component. The next verses say, "For though your people, O Israel, be as the sand of the sea, a remnant of them will return. The destruction decreed shall overflow with righteousness. For the Lord of hosts will make a determined end in the midst of all the land. Therefore, thus says the Lord God of hosts, O my people who dwell in Zion, do not be afraid of the Assyrian. He shall strike you with a rod and lift up his staff against you in the manner of Egypt. For yet a very little while the indignation will cease, as will my anger in their destruction." I'm going to skip ahead past a couple of these verses here right now. This is just a little while later to some very famous verses we know from Isaiah 14. It says, "The Lord of hosts has sworn, saying, Surely as I have thought, so it shall come to pass, and as I have proposed, so it shall stand, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountains tread him underfoot. Then his yoke shall be removed from them, and his burden removed from their shoulders. This is the purpose that is purposed against the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out over all the nations." Isaiah 30 later says, "The Lord will cause his glorious voice to be heard and show the descent of his arm with the indignation of his anger and the flame of a devouring fire, with scattering tempest and hailstones. For through the voice of the Lord, Assyria will be beaten down as he strikes with the rod." Okay? Now, the reason that I take the time to show you that is in our lifetime, there have been some startling reemergences of nations that prior to this period were not there. We saw Iran become a country in 1906, Afghanistan in 1921, Egypt in 1922. And these, as you can see, these were all, portions of this were all controlled by that one general, that Seleucid Empire that took over after Alexander the Great died, and 4 of his generals took over. That's where 4 horns kind of rose up out of the one in the one vision that we took a look at. And then Egypt, of course, was under Ptolemy, one of the other generals. And we looked at the slide where those two, Ptolemy in the south and Seleucus in the north, they fought over Israel as like a buffer zone. But what we have is in 1922, Iraq becomes a nation again. And then in 1938, Syria becomes a nation again. And those 2 places, they are the territory that once upon a time was Assyria. I have friends from Baghdad, Iraq. They don't speak Arabic. They speak Assyrian. That's the culture that they came out of. In fact, met some other Iraqis that came out of a region of Iraq, and they called themselves Chaldeans. Well, what were the Chaldeans? That was the region of Babylon. Babylon is a very real city in Assyria today. The ancient Babylon is still there. There are people that live around the ruins. And that is very interesting because it leads us to a callback about something that is important that the Bible talks about. It talks about the doom of Babylon. And this is, what I'm about to show you is this is another reason why there's a future component to some of those verses that we talked about Assyria, because remember, Assyria was called what? The land of Nimrod, right? So there is a prophesied destruction whose attributes have yet to be fulfilled. And we'll cover this more as we get into Revelation 17 and 18, but I want to get you familiar with it. So the destruction of Babylon is prophesied in Isaiah 13, 14, and Jeremiah 50 and 51. And we just took a look at some of those verses from Isaiah 14. It is said that it will never be inhabited again in those chapters. And as I just told you, Babylon is inhabited right now. It says the building materials are never reused. When Saddam Hussein was ruling over Iraq, he was doing something with the bricks that came from ancient Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar wrote his name on every brick in Babylon. It says, "Behold, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon." So Saddam Hussein was doing the same thing when he was attempting to rebuild the city. But the Bible has prophesied that the building materials will never be reused again. It says that it will literally be like Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you know what the archaeological sites of Sodom and Gomorrah are like today? They give off radioactive isotopes. Whatever hit them so hard that they're still glowing. Then what we have is the description of the fall of Babylon. And this is very different. This is the part that we have seen. In Daniel, when the chapter in Daniel where you have the handwriting on the wall and King Belshazzar, he's going to fall, and then the Medes and the Persians take over. We've studied some of this stuff, right? The issue is Babylon falls without a battle. It was never destroyed in battle. In fact, King Cyrus of the Persians, he brags about it. We have it in secular historical record that he brags about how he took the city without a fight. Well, that's not the prophesied destruction of Babylon. Babylon became Alexander's capital during his reign when the Greeks were ruled. Now the city has atrophied over the centuries, But as I said, it's presently being rebuilt. So when we get to Revelation 17 and 18, and we are confronted with this topic of Mystery Babylon, what we are actually confronted with is a religion. She's called the Great Whore. She rides the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. She's the mother of harlots and abominations. She's drunk with the blood of the saints. Revelation 18 refers to her as the great city, kings, merchants, and those who trade by the sea. Now, modern-day Babylon, we don't even think of as being close to the water. It's in a desert region. But how many of you 30 years ago, 40 years ago would have ever thought Dubai would be a vacation destination? They have proven what they are capable of when it comes to rebuilding a city. So, I want to share this verse with you out of Zechariah 5 through 7. It says, "Then the angel who talked with me came out and said to me, 'Lift up your eyes now and see what this is that goes forth.' So I asked, 'What is it?'" That's a good question to ask when somebody says, "See what this is." I'm sure the angel was like, ugh. And he said, "It is a basket that is going forth." He also said, "This is their resemblance throughout the earth. Here is a lead disc lifted up, and this is a woman sitting inside the basket." So a basket, in other translations of the Bible, it's called an ephah. It's akin to what we would call a bushel, okay? It's the largest dry measurement that they had in the ancient Near East. And it was common among the Israelites. And so as solids represent the things of goodness and liquids represent the things of truth, a dry measure represents the measure of goodness and the test of quality of goodness. That's how the thing was measured. So in general, the ephah was supposed to represent a good thing. It's an ephah that is said to go forth to point out its practical use. But the verse goes on and says, "Then he said, 'This is wickedness.'" Well, that doesn't make sense. "And he thrust her down, the woman that was in the basket, and threw this lead cover over the basket to cover its mouth." In other words, he's trying to keep this chick inside this basket. "Then I raised my eyes and looked, and there were 2 women coming with the wind in their wings, for they had wings like the wings of a stork, and they lifted up the basket between the earth and the heavens." So 2 possibly angelic creatures, possibly something else. They come down because it's not specifically described as angels, and angels aren't typically described as women in the Bible. Comes down, picks this thing up in his vision. It carries it, and it says, "So I said to the angel who talked with me, 'Where are they carrying the basket?' And he said to me, 'To build a house for it in the land of Shinar when it is ready, and the basket will be set there on its base.'" Now, where is the land of Shinar? The land of Shinar is the plains of Babylon. That's where Ezekiel was taken captivity. That's where he prophesied from. The land of Shinar is where people traveled through, set up camp, built the Tower of Babel, and Nimrod became their leader in Genesis chapter 11. This basket with wickedness in it that is supposed to be a good measure is in fact wickedness. It's being taken back to the land of Shinar. So that's what we see, sealed in with a lead lid. It's carried with the wings of a stork. Here's another reason why we don't necessarily think they're angels. A stork to Israel is an unclean bird, so these are unclean creatures. Between the earth and heaven, to build a base for it in the land of Shinar, well, it will be established. And ultimately, what the Bible goes on to say there is that it will be judged there, a future judgment. So, what we begin to see then is a comparison between Israel and the woman in Revelation chapter 12 and the woman who rides the beast in Revelation chapter 17. One world religion. Maybe it's got some of the Catholic cult in it. Maybe it has the Islamic cult in it. Maybe it has a blend of a whole bunch of it. Doesn't really matter. Those roots that came out of Babylon back in Genesis 11 are going to spring forward again. And it's going to come down to a battle between 2 women, 2 seeds, 2 cities. But this is the problem, this destruction of Babylon, and I have this chart. We'll post this in the comments. You can print this one out for yourself. you can see that it says that many nations will be attacking Babylon. And I have the book and then the chapter that it's in and then the verses all mapped out for you. Israel will be in the land and they will be forgiven. Is Israel forgiven yet? No, because they have not cried out and repented with sorrow over him who they pierced. But for these prophecies for Babylon's destruction to take place, Israel must be in the land and be forgiven. That's yet future. It will be like Sodom and Gomorrah. Has anything like that ever happened in Iraq/Syria yet? No. It'll never be inhabited again. The bricks will never be reused. It will happen in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verses and being described in Revelation 17 and 18 as during the day of the Lord, which we know well is the last day. That day is not today. It is a literal Chaldean Babylon in the land of Shinar. Verse Isaiah 13, 19, 14, 22, Jeremiah 50, 50, and 51, 4, 24, and 63. That's a lot of verses. So that's one of the reasons why we think there may be something that's going to be reborn. So with that time, let me check my time so we can go. Trying to cover as much as I can, but I'm going to keep going. Let's go to Matthew 24, 37 through 39, and I want you to see something. Jesus is speaking here, and he says, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days of Noah before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man." What is unique about these days that has to do with the coming of the Son of Man? I submit to you that when the enemy received authority, power, and responsibility from Adam, because Adam failed to do his job in Eden. How do we know that the enemy received that? Because in Matthew 4 and in Luke 4, the devil tells Jesus, "Look at all the kingdoms of the world. They have been given to me, and I give them to whoever I want." Well, who gave them to him? Adam did. He didn't know all the rules. Satan does not operate in some otherworldly supernatural power. The only power he has is the authority, power, and responsibility, a.k.a. dominion, that God gave to Adam, and Adam delegated or abdicated to him when he failed to cut down that tree in Genesis 3. Anytime Satan oversteps the bounds of this lawful dominion, God in his omnipotent power steps in to stop the work of the enemy. I'm going to build that case for you really quickly. We see it happen at the flood. The law in place here was that creatures shall reproduce after their own kind. The violation is something that happens in Genesis chapter 6. The sons of God and daughters of men produce offspring. That is not two different lines of humanity. I'll build that case in a second. That is two different types of being making babies. And when God said that is a violation of what I said to Adam when I gave him dominion over the earth, that is not going to happen. He stepped in and he stopped it with the flood. Then we have the Tower of Babel. The law was be fruitful and multiply over the face of the earth. The violation is they instead decided to stop moving, have one global culture that refused to fill the entire earth. And God stepped in and he stopped them. Sodom and Gomorrah, creatures shall reproduce after their own kind. The law, people think it's all about homosexuality in Sodom and Gomorrah, but it's not, because Peter and Jude, they tell us that what happened there was like what happened in the days of Noah. Testifies, the New Testament testifies that that's what happened there. So God, once again, he stepped in and he annihilated it. Then we get to the coming of, and this is kind of the unique one that proves the rule, the coming in of the conquering Israelite people to be a witness of God set up to judge the other nations. God tells Joshua, destroy all of these tribes. They were called the Rephaim tribes, or the Anakim tribes. And it's the tribes that he tells them, you will go in and you will destroy them. You will keep none of their goods. You will wipe out their women. You will wipe out their children. You will wipe out their animals. And people say that the God of the Old Testament endorsed genocide. Each and every one of those tribes was a tribe that had giants in it, like the sons of Anak or the brothers and sisters of people like Goliath. Goliath had 3 brothers. And we know from Genesis 6 that those giants, they came about because the sons of God chose to have children with the daughters of men, and there was a genetic evil that took place. So instead of stepping in and doing it himself, God authorized Joshua to do what God had already set an example of doing. And of course, Joshua failed to get it done. And because of that, all of those same countries, you can work it out on a map, but all of those same countries where they failed to drive out the giants and they failed to drive out those nations and they didn't get that done, those are the same countries that vex Israel to this day. So I want to switch presentations real quick here. And I want to go back to one of our presentations from Legends of the Fall and just show you here. And get it to open up. Come on. You know, open. There we go. Find where I want to be. All right, this comes from the section of Legends of the Fall, Origin of Man. It has to do with how we were created. And we're building the case that man had no ancestors. And I want to introduce you to this text, Genesis 6, 1 through 2. It says, "Now it came to pass, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and took wives for themselves of all whom they chose." And that phrase that I have highlighted in the text there, in Hebrew, is Benai Ha-Elohim. We're going to get comfortable with that phrase. We'll see it again here. It says, "There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were old, men of renown." Now, what's important to recognize is it wasn't until the 5th century AD that the angel interpretation of Genesis, meaning that these sons of God were angels who came down and decided to take wives for themselves of the daughters of men, that this angel view became increasingly viewed with embarrassment and began to be attacked by critics. Furthermore, the worship of angels had begun within the church, and as celibacy had also become an institution in the church, the angel view of Genesis was feared as impacting these views. So, men like Celsus and Julian the Apostate used the traditional angel belief to attack Christianity. Julius Africanus resorted to what is now known as the Sethite view, a view that even places like Answers in Genesis love to teach an interpretation as a more comfortable ground. It wasn't angels that did it. It was the godly line of Seth that came and took wives from the ungodly line of Cain. Does that seem like what the text is saying? Don't you think if that's what they wanted to say, that's what the Bible could have said? Cyril of Alexandria also repudiated the Orthodox angel position with the line of Seth interpretation. Augustine also embraced the Sethite theory, and thus it prevailed for the Middle Ages. And it is still widely taught today among many churches who find the literal angel view a bit disturbing. There are many outstanding Bible teachers who still stay away from this view. They're scared of it. And we're going to keep going through it a little bit. But just so you're aware, when I was a kid and we were just beginning to uncover this stuff, my mom made the mistake of just talking about what she was uncovering in the text to our next door neighbor who was her best friend. The next morning, her husband had every book. We were homeschooling together and we were close and we snowmobiled together. The next morning, every book they'd ever borrowed was on our doorstep and our friendship was over. Like that. After years of friendship, that was just Too much, too creepy, too weird. So I'm telling you, I know firsthand how people handle this stuff. Let's go to Job 1:6 and look at a couple other scriptures, okay? It said, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them." Now, in this case, do you think that the term sons of God has anything to do with Sethites, sons of Seth, Adam's third son? No. It's the same phrase, Benai Ha Elohim. The term is translated sons of Elohim, and it's consistently used in the Old Testament for angels. Job 2:1, again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. Do you think that's human people, or do you think that's other angelic beings like Satan was an angelic being? That's the context that it's being given to you in. If we go to Job 38, 4, 5, 6, and 7, look what we see. God is here questioning Job at the end of the book. And he says, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" He's talking to a human, and he says, "Where was humanity when I did this?" So humanity has just been disqualified from participating in whatever this term we're going to see is. He says, "Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know." Don't let anybody ever tell you that sarcasm is unchristian, because we have a very sarcastic God. "Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstones when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" How can it be the godly line of Seth if humanity wasn't around, and God just made a really big sarcastic deal of saying humanity wasn't around when I did any of this? But now let's go to the New Testament, and let's see what the New Testament can tell us about this term. Obviously, it's not the same term in Hebrew because we're now dealing with the Greek, but it is the same equivalent term. Jesus says in Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Oh, wait, that's very interesting. Benai Elohim, sons of God, never used of believers in the Old Testament. It was so understood by the ancient rabbinical sources, by the Septuagint translators in the 3rd century before Christ, and by the early church fathers. It's never used to describe saints until we get to the New Testament. Attempts to apply this term to godly leadership, as another interpretation does, are totally unfounded because the Old Testament never applies it in such a way to godly people. It's not till we get to the New Testament that we start to see that happen. Look at Luke 20, 35 through 36. It says, "But those who are counted worthy to attain that age," what age? "And the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage, nor can they die anymore, for they are equal to the angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection." Now, incidentally, this is the verse that people who are against the angel view of Genesis chapter 6 will use, because they say, look, see, angels aren't married. They don't give in marriage, so why would they take wives for themselves? In heaven, they don't get married, is what is being said. But Peter tells us they left their first okaterion. They left their first estate. They left their first domain. Why? So they could take wives for them. They went into our domain to do something that happens in ours. God is here describing that we're going to be in their domain doing what they're doing now. This is not an argument to say that angels can't have the possibility of reproducing. People say, well, angels aren't given in married, therefore they don't have sex. So you're telling me you have to be married to have sex? I thought we taught celibacy and that marriage was for the marital bed and for the marital union. That's what sex was for, because we wanted people to have godly relationships. If it wasn't possible to have sex outside of marriage, why do we have to preach on that? It's a bad argument. It doesn't hold up. Don't let them fool you. Sons of God are equal to the angels because they are sons of the resurrection, meaning they have experienced the new birth. Why? Romans 8:14 says, "For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God." Being born of the Spirit is what qualifies New Testament believers to be sons of God. Why? Romans 8:19. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing. All of creation is waiting for a final revealing, as if there is still yet a future component. Because even though we've been justified through what Christ accomplished, even though we have been sanctified by what Christ accomplished, Paul tells us we have not yet been glorified because we do not yet have our Christ-like bodies. You with me? Creation is waiting for the revealing of these sons of God. Well, the devil can only do what he sees God do and pervert it. Would it not make sense to want to pervert the revealing of the sons of God? Yet here we are, the revealing of the sons of God. They wait for this new thing. Galatians 3:26 says, "For you are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus." The best possible definition of sons of God, while it may include angels, is more broad. Benai Ha Elohim would best be defined as anyone who is a direct creation of God. Adam was a Benai Ha Elohim because he had no ancestors. He was made from the dust of the earth by God. Cain, Abel, and Seth were not Benai Ha Elohim because they were made through human procreation. But when people are born again through faith in Jesus Christ, we are completely made new. Old things have passed away. What now exists has never existed before. We are a what? A new creation in Jesus Christ. AKA, we are a direct creation of God. AKA, we become the sons of God. All I've done for you in this portion of this session is set up for you what I'm going to do in the next session. Because unfortunately, I couldn't get it all done in one. There's just too much to teach. What you need to begin to see is the Bible is hinting at a re-revealing of the sons of God that's supposed to be for us. But remember what Jesus said, as things were in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. And what was going on in the days of Noah? The sons of God took for themselves wives among the men and went, the women, I can't even think, just had a Biden moment. Had a moment where they took for themselves wives among the daughters of men. That's the word I was looking for, daughters. And they began to have children with them, and those children were giants. That word in the Greek it is gigantos in the Greek, but that does not mean giant. All it means is earthborn, born on the earth. They became mighty men of valor. And each of those nations wanted to have one because they were soldiers of great power and strength. And I submit to you, the last part of this course that we're going to take as we close out this little mini-series on the Antichrist is this. What if all of those perspectives that I've given you, they culminate in the fact that Satan reveals his own false sons of God at the end of this age and brings forth his own mighty man of valor, who is, in fact, exactly what those Nephilim in Genesis 6 were. And because of that, because dominion is finally lawfully violated by Satan himself, God can step in and judge him once and for all. Let's take a break.